Good afternoon. Thanks, Jackie. Sorry about that. I'm a little bit late. We're having some audio technical difficulties. So I wanted to thank you for joining us this afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on which time zone you are joining me from. In a continuation of our series on upgrading Maximo today, I will be covering some of the new features that are available with the latest release of Maximo 7.5. This webinar is intended to be a high-level overview of the new features, and I will try and cover new features for legacy Maximo users as well, because I do understand that there are some attendees today that are on some older versions of Maximo, specifically version 4, 5, 6. So there's been many new features incorporated into the product along the way. So I will not certainly be able to touch on all the new features. So this is basically meant to be a high level. But after the webinar today, there will be a follow-up email with a link to this recording. We are recording the webinar, as well as some resources that are available from our website that you can leverage to learn more about some of the new features and enhancements in Maximo 7.5. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Okay, so real quick here, I wanted to put out an audience poll and just kind of take the temperature a little bit on the audience that we have out here on the webinar today and see which versions of Maximo we're currently running. So I'll give you just a few moments here to answer the poll, and then I'll close the poll out. Okay. See, some of you are still answering here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll. Looks like the majority is running on 7.1. We still have some version 4 and version 5 users out there today, as well as some version 6, and also version 7.5. So I wanted to thank you for taking the poll and giving us your feedback. That'll be helpful as we go through the webinar this afternoon. Okay, so if, as we did with the prior webinar, if you have any questions about what you're seeing today or what I'm covering, please feel free to email us at info@projetech.com, and we will try to get back to you with a response in a timely manner. We will post all questions that we feel are relevant for other audiences to our website, and there will also be a link to that page on our website where you can see those questions and answers, which will be part of the follow-up email that you'll receive after today's webinar. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Projetech, just quickly here, we're privately held. We were established in 1990 by our CEO and president of the company, who is Steve Richmond. We're headquartered here in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is where I'm delivering the webinar from. We're a premier IBM business partner, and we provide our specialties. We provide Maximo as a service in the cloud, and we're actually awarded and recognized for that accomplishment in the services that we provide in our cloud by IBM at the 2012 Maximo Pulse Conference. Our staff is made up primarily of Maximo experts. We deliver system administration and help desk support for our cloud clients, and we're also a provider of Maximo training. Projetech performed many Maximo upgrades, starting from version 4X to 7.5 over the years. And if you don't know who I am, I'm Julie Rampello. I've been with Projetech almost 19 years now. It's kind of scary. But I used to be a Maximo implementer, project manager, and trainer for Projetech prior to my current role, which is in business development. Okay, so let's get to the webinar. So today's topics we're going to look at, obviously the new features in 7.5. We're going to take a look at the technology overview of 7.5. We'll talk a little bit about multiple organizations and sites and configurations and how that impacts the enterprise application that you're going to be seeing today. Security enhancements, some enhancements, new features around equipment or what we now refer to as assets, as well as work management. PM forecasting is a new feature that I was pretty excited about when they released that. I think it was long overdue. We'll take a look at some of the enhancements under materials and supply chain management, as well as purchasing, reporting, workflow applications, and the Maximo integration framework that's now core within the Maximo applications. Pretty cool tool. And automation scripting. So those are some of the new features that I listed there in the prior slide. Obviously, those are not all new features, but these are the key ones that I wanted to touch on today. We can certainly do, deeper dives into any of the topics if there is interest in a future webinar. So please let us know if you're interested in going into detail on any of those topics. So keep in mind as we go through the webinar today that the new features that I'm showing you today are relative to the version of Maximo that you're running or are familiar with. So as I go through some of the new features, you may see some of those or hear me talk about them and say, well, this was already part of version 6 or version 7.1. So I just wanted to try again to make sure that we encompass the broader audience here in today's webinar. So for Maximo version 4X users, this is a Windows-based application. It's client-server, so you need client applications on the workstation in order to access Maximo on the server and run it. SQR and Crystal Reports were the core reporting tool or applications within version 4 Maximo. Version 4 is a stable, mature product. We have several customers that we work with that are, perfectly satisfied with the product and, haven't really seen a need to move to a newer release. At some point, the technology that they're running Maximo on is going to be obsolete or not supported in their environment. So hence the, the upgrade series that Projetech is delivering. One of the reasons that we're delivering the upgrade series is just to educate our user base on what's out there and why you'd want to upgrade. And so obviously it's very outdated technology, but it's still around. So with Maximo version 5, this was the first attempt at a web-based version of Maximo. There were performance issues. It was a little bit clunky, as I like to refer to it. It wasn't real user-friendly, but it was the first step into the world of the browser and the internet. There's a separate Maximo administrator console that system admins have to log into in order to make updates to Maximo or do administrative functions. So separate console, that was still truly a Windows-based application. It wasn't part of the core Maximo applications, which were now more web-based. This is when the Actuate reporting tool was introduced, and that carried on through version 6 Maximo. So it was more of a web-based reporting tool. For the Maximo version 4 users that upgraded to 5, it was a bit of a learning curve for them to make that transition from the simple-to-use Crystal reporting tool, let's say, to Actuate reports. But it was reporting software that worked with the web-based version of Maximo 5. So user start centers were introduced in 5.2. And I'll talk a little bit more about start centers here when we get into the 7.5 applications. And in Maximo version 6X, I'll call it, that's after the IBM acquisition. So IBM was starting to incorporate more of the IT and service request management components into Maximo. So what IBM did was, and this is a big change for somebody coming from version 4 to 5, even if you're going to go right from 4 to 7.5 or 5 to 7.5, it's getting used to this change in terminology. We're so used to calling equipment equipment. It's now referred to as an asset, because an asset could be facilities maintenance asset, a manufacturing asset. It could be an IT asset now. So in order to kind of standardize the terminology there, IBM changed the name in the labels on the screens to asset for anywhere that we saw the word equipment. So and on the database side of things, if that's where your area of interest lies, that does impact your reports and queries and things like that refer to equipment as the field or the table, because it is now referred to as assets. So that was a big jump and a big change for the users. The organizations app is part of 6, where you can go in and set up different organizations for your company within one instance of Maximo and then create sites within each of those organizations. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that concept here in just a moment. Still using Actuate reports in 6. The IT asset management and service request management functions were introduced. They were separate applications which you could then integrate within the core EAM Maximo. And by the way, what I'm really going to be covering today in the webinar is related more towards EAM Maximo, core Maximo. I'm not really going to get into industry solutions and add-ons and things like that per se, but I will provide, as a follow-up to this webinar, we will provide you with some resources if you want to do a little bit of research in those areas. And lastly, the application designer. This is a core application now in Maximo. It's in 7.5 as well, which allows drag and drop functionality that, it's fairly simple and intuitive to go in and be able to make a screen change using this tool. In like 5, you had to actually pull up like the XML file and modify that if you wanted to modify a screen for a user or the way that it presents. This way, with Application Designer, we're able to do this all through front-end drag and drop tools. And then the concept of the item and company sets was introduced in version 6. And again, I'll get a little bit deeper into that here in just a moment. So I'm just kind of going through the history here a little bit, and then we'll actually get into the 7.5 new features, and I will show you the 7.5 applications as well. So 7.1 was really the first major release after 6.2. BIRT reports replaced the Actuate reporting integrated tool. So a different platform, but it's, again, an open source web-based reporting tool. There's probably 120 or 30 plus out-of-the-box reports that come with the reporting tool in Maximo. And if you're interested, I think on our upgrade resource page on our website, there should be a link or a PDF file that you can download to see all of the out-of-the-box reports and what they look like, and screen prints and kind of descriptions of what they are and which applications they're available from. So that's a pretty nice resource if you want to leverage that. It's on our website. Migration Manager was introduced. So this was an application that we could use for developers or system administrators who wanted to migrate maybe a development instance and all the customizations that might have been made in that development environment of Maximo over to maybe a test environment or over to production. So you could package up all those customizations that were made or changes to the Maximo applications and migrate them across the different environments without having to rewrite the customizations in each environment. There were many application enhancements in 7.1, of course, from 6.2. Some of those include being able to create a work order from the asset application, reporting downtime in the asset application, the ability to associate an item image or a picture of a piece of spare part or an inventory item right on the Maximo screen. So I could pull up that part in the Maximo screen and see a picture of it. We could have multiple equipment or assets or locations on the same work order, and that afforded us the ability to split costs across multiple general ledger accounts, which was something that users were requesting from the older versions. The ability to nest job plans. So, for example, I can have a job plan, and then for one step or task on that job plan, I can link to a nested job plan, which is basically just another job plan. So I'm able to then use that to pull in multiple job plans into one and associate it with a PM schedule. Work order status flows were introduced. So this is for work order tasks. So if you enable this on a work order, then basically what you're saying is we cannot do this next task until the previous task was completed. And you can build some other constraints or rules around that process as well if you decide to use that. Classifications, which were typically just for assets or items, which allowed you to kind of an ad hoc tool or application in Maximo that we could use to create our own equipment classifications and what types of attributes do we want to track, such as specifications for a motor, for example. What are, what's the frame size and the horsepower of that motor, and all of those items could be considered an attribute for a motor classification. So we are now able to create work order classifications or job plan classifications within Maximo 7.1 and 7.5. Okay, so moving on to Maximo 7.5, which is the latest release of Maximo. One of the things I do want to call out, this is not typically the enterprise asset management or the EAM solution provided by IBM for Maximo, but there is Smart Cloud Control Desk. I did want to mention this, that it replaces the TAMIT and the TSMR solutions from the prior releases of Maximo that were out there. So we're pretty excited about it here, actually. It's fairly new. There's a lot of neat, cool features within this product. We're going to actually, start using this internally to manage our customers. So as we learn more about the solution, we are going to probably be providing a future webinar on Smart Cloud Control Desk, just for your information. So in 7.5, there's some enhanced query-based reporting features. Automation scripts were introduced, and I know that our tech team here rants and raves about this solution because it has made their jobs a little bit easier when it comes to supporting our customers, reducing the need or eliminating the need for them to have to customize Java class files when they need to make certain customizations to or extend Maximo's capabilities from what it can do out of the box. In the past, they'd have to go in and, possibly customize the Java class file and then rebuild it, redeploy the EAR files, and it was kind of a tedious process. And we also had to then, we would have to have downtime for the users because we weren't able to do this without the users being out of the system. So this gets rid of all that. We can do this right through the front end, and I'll talk more about that later in the webinar. The latest version of Maximo, of course, is going to work with the more recent browser versions of Internet Explorer and Firefox, which are supported by IBM as browsers that will work with Maximo. And there's a new skin, or what we refer to as a user interface. The look and the feel of what Maximo looks like now has been updated, of course, from prior versions. And I'm just mentioning this last item here because I thought this was a great new feature where a user can actually import data or export data directly from an application. And of course, they have to have permission. We would not probably want everybody to be able to import data. However, even if you do and you use these tools, what happens by using these out-of-the-box import tools is that Maximo will enforce all the business logic. So a user can't just randomly import bad data. Maximo is going to make sure that the data is, going to meet the requirements of the database before it will allow the data to be imported. Okay, so just an overall table of version-to-version feature comparison starting with 6.2 up to 7.5 at a high level. You can see a list there of some of the newer applications or features that were introduced based on the versions going back to 6.2. So I pulled this from IBM's website. I believe it was from IBM's website where I found this. What they had was back to 6.2. So just real quick as I look through here, I mentioned Migration Manager. Attached documents can now be attached at the task level in a work order. That came out in 7.1. Full supply chain capabilities, which I'm going to go deeper into here in just a few moments, with version 7.5. And I mentioned the import and export utilities, asset templates, and PM forecasting and scripts. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that here in just a moment. Okay, so as a reminder, if anybody out there has questions about what I'm showing you today, please remember to submit those questions to info@projetech.com, and we'll be happy to try to get an answer to you, hopefully within the next 24 hours, and we will also post those questions, as I mentioned earlier, to our website. Okay, let me back up for just a moment here. So the technology overview is 7.5. So this is more for administrators, where they're going to be more interested in understanding what the underlying technology is for the latest version of Maximo. And most of this was really released with version 7.1, and what we're doing is just continuing on some of these platforms and moving up to some of the the later releases of these platform software. So it's J2 or Java 2 enterprise based enterprise application, the web application interface for users to access Maximo applications. So when a user is accessing a Maximo screen, that is an application. These applications have been built on J2EE. Maximo is fully configurable from the presentation content to the business logic. Configurable authentication, so Maximo has a robust security capabilities built in with the application, or you can also integrate with LDAP or Active Directory. There are integration mechanisms that are available with Core Maximo now. We refer to that as the integration framework, and this used to be referred to as the MIA or the MIG in older versions of Maximo, and you typically had to purchase it separately, and it was fairly expensive from what I recall, but it is now part of the Core Maximo. So we can integrate using these tools provided with integration framework via web services, JMS queues, HTTP, EJB, XML files, flat files, and interface tables in the database. The built-in reporting, I mentioned BIRT before, but Cognos is another option. This is a reporting software that IBM acquired a few years ago. It is now available with 7.5. It's part of the application. You don't have to purchase it separately, but you do have to basically do a couple of things to make it available to the end users. So there is a report design tool available with BIRT or Cognos, and I will say from what my experience is that Cognos is more of a typical end user friendly application versus the BIRT tool, which is a little more technical. And there's support for integration with customers' reporting systems. You can certainly still integrate with other third-party apps, and typically you'd use probably an ODBC connection or something like that to connect to the Maximo database to report on it through another tool. Okay, so the supported application servers, again with 7.1, WebSphere, which is included, it's an IBM product, and then WebLogic. It's supported, but it's not included with Maximo 7.5. So if you prefer to, and it was available with some of the earlier releases of Maximo. So if you decide to upgrade to 7.5 and you want to continue WebLogic, well, as long as you own a license separately from Maximo to WebLogic, then you can certainly run Maximo on it. The supported database platforms for 7.5 are DB2, which is an IBM product, Oracle, and Microsoft SQL Server. Now you can see the actual versions and releases of what's supported with version 7.5. The operating systems and which versions of the database software and all that. You can find those here in the configuration matrix, which is available from IBM. And the link is actually again on our website on the Upgrade Resources page. And if you want to download that, you are more than welcome to do so. So I'm just kind of opening it up here real quick so you can see it. I did show it in our last webinar in case you weren't able to attend. I wanted to bring it up again. So this shows me, operating system compatibility based on the version of Maximo going back to 6.2. And then there's our smart cloud applications that I mentioned earlier. It's a obviously pretty comprehensive spreadsheet. So you just have to get in there and kind of dig around and get comfortable with what it is that you're looking at. Okay. So that's the configuration matrix. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is sets, because this is really introduced in version 6. But if we've got some, even version 5, version 4 users on the webinar today, it helps to understand this is the layout of Maximo now. So it is truly an enterprise application. So we're able to deploy it to global organizations. So and be able to set up an instance of Maximo that works for the different business units within a company, because of this native design now that's available with Maximo. So what this slide is showing us here, or trying to show us, is let me go ahead and change my highlighter here so we can see this a little bit better. But Maximo supports multiple languages, currencies, and time zones. Item and company sets. These were introduced, I believe, with 7.1. I could be mistaken, but I think it was 7.1. And they can be shared across organizations within Maximo. So what we're showing you here on this slide is that in North America, in this example, let's assume that this whole thing represents one instance of Maximo, meaning a database, basically. So in North America, we've got two operations. Maybe it's manufacturing operations that, they're making one product in one operation and a different product in the other operations. So what they did was when they set up Maximo, assuming, the bottom here, the bottom tier is the actual database where all of our data ends up ultimately, no matter what site we're at or what organization we're at, it all is going to basically end up here in the enterprise level database. But what we can do in Maximo using the sets applications that are now available is we can share vendors. So we have a vendor list that we purchase items from or parts from or equipment from. I can create a company set, and in this example, we've got organization 1 and 2, which are North America operations 1 and 2, sharing the same vendor list. They also share the same parts list or item set. So basically that means that these two organizations can buy from the same vendors, or maybe, maybe the products they're making are similar, so they're buying very similar, parts or equipment from the vendors. So it made sense in this case, in this scenario, to set them up with one company set and one item set, and then break them out into two separate organizations, as we did here in the slide. And then within the organizations, we break out our sites. So you can see Organization 1 has 4 sites. Organization 2 has 2 sites. And then we've got our South America operations. And so they could be manufacturing something completely different from North America, or their operations are just different, and they're ordering from different vendors, different types of parts and equipment. So in this case, it made sense to create their own item set, their own vendor list, and a separate organization for South America's sites. But this is all one, one company basically within one database in Maximo. And typically, when you're implementing Maximo or you're considering a major upgrade from an older version of Maximo to 7.5, this is one of the things that you have to look at, when you start on your project, is how are we going to take advantage of this, and then how are we going to set up our structure. If you're fairly flat or you just have one operation, it's pretty simple. But, if you're going to implement more of a global solution within Maximo, then you have to really think through a lot of this. One of the things that, a rule of thumb is if you're trying to decide, where do we break out the organizations within our company, one of the things that you can look at is, the general ledger accounting. If you have different accounting needs as opposed to a different, say, business unit within your company, then that might be the key indicator of where to break down your organization. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and go into Maximo. We've got about a half hour left here for our demonstration today. So I do want to get into the product, and I'll try to then make sure that we cover some of the big changes and enhancements that have happened to Maximo since the earlier versions. So I'm signing into a demo application. We have sample data, obviously, and the first thing that I see as a user when I sign into Maximo is a Start Center. And so as we get to the later version of Maximo, the 7.5, we're really taking the concept of the Start Center and enhancing its capabilities and making it more of a, kind of a dashboard, if you will, or just an easier way for users to get to the information or get to the applications that they need to work in Maximo. So when I sign in as Todd Winston, he has actually 3 separate Start Centers under his login. And maybe he's the site manager. So he has a Start Center template or a tab set up for that role. And these are customizable, and that doesn't mean that we have to modify source code to do this. This is all front-end changes or tailoring that we're able to do with the core products using some of the edit features and some of these menu items that you see across the top right side. So this is all driven on security. If you don't want users changing their start centers, then certainly we can take that permission away from them. But this is an example of what a site manager might want to see when they sign into Maximo. It's really going to be more about what's going on within my facilities, of course. And so KPIs, or key performance indicators, was introduced, I believe, with version 5, but it's just along the way, of course, there's been enhancements and improvements. So Todd wants to see all these key performance indicators listed right there in the Start Center. And you can have as few or as many as you want, or you can have none. It just depends on what your needs are. But as an example, the first one here is for open work orders, that he can see right away that, hey, our actual is 46 open work orders at this time. Our target's only 10. So we're 36 over. So that's why you see that KPI is in red font versus some of the other colors. So if it's green, the little status icon here is green, we're doing well. If it's red, we're not doing so hot. So you can create KPIs. There is a KPI application. Let's see if I can find it here. Here we go. It's under reporting. That's one way. So you can go in here to KPI Manager and build these KPIs, and they're SQL statements basically. If creating SQL statements is not your thing, you can actually go into a user application, let's say work order tracking. Okay, so you can see for some of the legacy Maximo users, you're seeing the drop-down menus as I navigate here. So go-to is where all of your modules are. And, just so everybody's aware that I obviously have access to a lot of modules. And the security piece in Maximo is very robust, so we're able to, if a user shouldn't be in a module, they're not going to show up here in their drop-down. So in work order tracking, I could build a query and, basically use my list tab, which is now a new tab released, I believe in 5 they called it search, but it's now called list starting with version 6. And for version 4 users, you use the globe icon after you did a search or a query to see your results. Now we have a list tab to replace that function, where I can filter the list of work orders in this case to, maybe a certain location, all locations that start with BR, for example. And if I hit my refresh, nope, I didn't get any. There we go. So let's filter the list instead to approved work orders. So I can use any of the column labels at the top. There's a search box under each label that I can click in. I can use lookups if they're there to make my choice, make my selection for my filter. And this one is a list of locations because that's what I selected on the main screen here. Or if I know the actual the filter criteria, I can just type it directly into the field, which is what I did here. So these are all approved work orders. So that's a query. We can save queries using the icon provided directly on the list tab. No more drilling down through the menus to find it. And there's a lot of other advanced functionality here that I won't go into. But so basically from the toolbar in Maximo now, there's a Create KPI button. So if I wanted to use this as a KPI, how many approved work orders, I only want so many, or whatever the criteria is, I'm able to use this Create KPI dialog box to specify my filters, modify a SQL statement if I'm comfortable doing so. But in this case, when you're building the query and using that as part of your KPI, then you don't really necessarily have to modify it or know SQL to do so. This is all front-end applications. Okay, so you might notice there's a lot of tabs here that aren't familiar to you. And, again, through security, if there's information or data that is not relevant to a certain group of users, then through security we're able to hide tabs or fields or, applications. It just depends on what those security needs are, but keep in mind that 7.5 can handle those very well. The security in Maximo is now very granular. We can conditionally hide fields, for example, based on other conditions. So if I don't want somebody to see somebody else's labor rate, for example, I can hide that from a group of users using the security functionality that's part of 7.5. Okay. So I covered some of the security enhancements for older legacy Maximo users. Just users can belong to more than one security group now, and their security privileges ultimately end up being a result of whatever's cumulative within that security group. They can have access to one or more multiple sites through one login. There's integration with Active Directory, single sign-on, which I mentioned earlier, and then I just mentioned the conditional privileges to be able to hide fields from users based off of certain conditions. Reports can now also be restricted by security groups. So within Maximo 7.5, there is a, let me just go in this way here. If I go to administration, which most everyday users don't have access to, under reporting, there's a report administration app. And in here, I can set up security for reports. So if I don't want a group of users to see certain reports, I can restrict that report by report, or if I want to restrict by user, I can do that as well. So there's a lot more that we can do with this application, but due to the time constraint, I won't go into all of those details now. Just be aware that you can set security by reports. With 7.5, we're also able to block IP addresses if you need to do so. And these are some of the newer enhanced applications in Maximo, and as a follow-up to this webinar today, you also receive this presentation. So you'll be able to kind of take a deeper look at the applications that you see here. But under asset management, for example, we have locations that can be now be repair facilities. So I'm able to move or write work orders for equipment at a different site within Maximo, as long as I'm associating it with that repair facility. Asset templates. This is a kind of a new application. It's part of Core Maximo. It used to only be available with calibration, which was an add-on in some of the earlier releases of Maximo. But if you're not familiar with asset template, one of the use cases is that, let's say that you want to add a whole several pieces of equipment that are all basically the same type of equipment, and you want to do kind of a batch input of all of these asset records into Maximo. Well, what you can do is create a template. Let me see if I've got an example to bring up here. Here's one for our favorite piece of equipment, which is a centrifugal pump. So this is a template for the centrifugal pump, and I can fill out the associated information or details that all of these, the new pumps that I'm going to create here in a batch format, all of the similarities that they may have, I would fill out here. I could build a spare parts list, for example, like we did here, if they all would have the same parts list, and that would make sense, or associate the same PM master, meters, etc. And then data sheets is part of calibration Maximo, which I do have implemented in my demo today, but that's typically not part of Core Maximo. But the template is. So if I want to create, let's say, 10 pumps using this one template, I can do that here from the action menu. Generate new assets. And I have to specify which site, so I'm going to use Bedford. Okay, and then I can specify location at this time. If they're all going to be at the same location, it would make sense to fill that out, but if they're going to be at different locations, maybe not. Serial number, you'd only default that, if it were one asset that you're creating. I wouldn't recommend it for a batch process. Installation date, quantity, I want to generate 10 of those. I can, define the starting asset number or equipment ID if I wanted to, or I could let Maximo just auto number it for me, and I can do that by clicking on Generate Assets. And before that actually happens, Maximo will show me this is what I'm going to create, and as long as I'm okay with all the information here, or I could fill out the serial numbers for each individual asset if I wanted to at this time. But once I'm ready to let Maximo create all 10 of these pumps, I just click OK, and Maximo is going to create all 10 as asset records, which I can now go in and create PMs and write work orders on them, etc. So it does this in a batch format. You know, I'm trying to think of some other use cases for it, but I think that's probably the best use case that I could come up with, and I thought that was worth mentioning in today's webinar. Job plans can be revised. Work order tracking has a new assignments tab where I can, on that tab, go in and assign a person to actually do the work that's on the plan for that work order. There's you had the separate, it was work manager in some of the earlier versions. It's now assignment manager, I believe, in the later releases. But as part of core Maximo 7.5, I can go in and assign people or labor resources directly to a work order through the tab. Okay, so here's an example. It's showing me all the planned resource requirements for labor from this particular work order, and from here I can go in and start assigning people under labor or crews, and then schedule them on certain days and times, and Maximo will look up their availability for me as well while I'm doing this whole process, so I make sure that I don't schedule them for times that they aren't available. So it kind of consolidates or incorporates what work manager and assignment manager do, but into the work order application itself. PM forecasting, definitely worth mentioning in my view. I think it's something that in the older versions was in demand, but just not an option. So a preventive maintenance schedule, of course, the Maximo is what is used as kind of a template, I call it, to generate or create work orders that are typically you know, recurring maintenance or preventive actions. So if I pull up an example of a PM schedule here in my demo, let's check this. Centrifugal pump inspection. This is a quarterly inspection for a pump. You can see the asset number is 11430. Again, it used to be referred to as equipment. Our job plan. So if you're looking at the overall screen from any of you running earlier versions, not a lot of changes here on the PM screen itself. Responsibility throughout Maximo, we've added some other options like work group and owners and owner groups, and again, it's sort of bringing in the concept of allowing IT departments to use Maximo to manage their their assets and the owners and users of those assets of computers and printers and all that, as well as some of the other functionalities that you see in some of the industry solutions, or that were only available with other industry solutions, such as utilities and calibration, which was basically either part of life sciences industry solution or a separate add-on, depending. But some of those things, as Maximo, as new versions are released from IBM, you can see some of those more popular applications and features are being brought into the core EAM product, as opposed to being a separate add-on or separate industry solution. So the PM forecast, getting back to that, is a new tab in Maximo where I can look and see when this particular PM schedule is going to create work orders, when those PMs are actually due in the future, and I can go out into the future as far as I want to. So this is a quarterly. I can go out 5 years in advance. I can go out 2 quarters, whatever, however far I want to go. And the Maximo is going to display for me a row for each one of those due dates within that time frame that I asked for. And I can modify any one of these forecast dates if I needed to. So if I know that we've got an outage in November, that in this we're just not going to get to it in this week because this is a lower priority inspection. So I'm going to push it out to December 1st, for example. So I can do that right here. And then what I would do is process pending reforecast, and that would actually update the database and change this one occurrence of the PM without affecting the others. You can also, what happens when you generate a forecast for a PM, you can also, it's stored in the database in a forecast table. I can also report on it. So I can make reports and forecast my PMs. I can download This is another new feature in 7.5 that you probably didn't have in 4 or maybe in version 5, but I can download what I see in front of me in many places in Maximo using a download link that's available in the table windows. Okay, so I can obviously go on and on about new features. So for the sake of time, I just want to quickly get back here. So this basically is showing me, the newer enhanced applications. Again, you're going to get a copy of this after the webinar, so let me move on to the next slide here and talk a little bit more about reporting. In 7.5, I mentioned earlier, it's BIRT reports. It's an open source report tool. You can use the report design application that comes with BIRT to modify your out-of-the-box reports if you wanted to, or create new reports that would then be available through the Maximo applications for your end users. You do need to kind of know how to, there is like a what you see is what you get interface with the report design tool, but you also will probably need to know a little bit of programming around BIRT. But it is open sourced. I think you can download the design tool directly from the internet for free. There's ad hoc report building, which is now part of the core Maximo application. If I go into Maximo here to show you an example, I will go to work order tracking because I think more people are familiar with this than the other applications. But when I go to my action menu at the top here, one of the other things too I want to mention is you can create a work package in 7.5. So I could query for multiple work orders, and once I do that, create a work package. And what will happen is Maximo creates one parent work order for all of the work orders I selected in my query and creates this hierarchy with just a couple of clicks. So that's a new feature worth mentioning. But if I go to Run Reports here, this gives me my out-of-the-box reports or any custom reports that have been integrated within Maximo applications. I can see those from the list here. The ones with the little paper and pencil icon, the bottom 3 in this case, were created through this query-based reporting tool, this ad hoc tool that I was referring to on the slide. So you can see here in the earlier versions where I think it was 7.1 where this came out, you weren't really able to edit it. You can only delete it and start over, but now we're able to edit any query-based reports that were created by a user. So I would actually be able to go back here and build or change my saved query-based report. But when you're creating a new one, basically you're looking at the same thing here. So Maximo will let a user select the fields that they want to see in a finished report. Maximo tries to give them some fields that are fairly common or popular at the bottom of the screen, but you can take any of them out if you don't want them just by clicking the arrow and removing them. And at the top here, available fields are ones that aren't already included in my report, but I could add them. So if I want to add actual labor costs, for example, and click that arrow, it brings it down to the bottom of my screen under selected fields. So these are the fields that are going to display data in my finished report. What's nice about this is that the user, it gives them a little bit more freedom than what we've had in other versions where they had to use Excel or another third-party tool that they were more comfortable with, or had to rely on somebody else more technical who were familiar with the native reporting tools that Maximo used to build a report for them. So this way they have a little more freedom to just on the fly, without a lot of training, be able to build their own reports. And again, this is only available if you give them permission to do so through security. Okay, so you can group and you can filter and you can sort, but all in all, basically when they're finished building the report, they can submit it. And then what they'll see then is a new window is going to come up with their report and all of the data, that the report finds based off of either the query that they did on the screen or the filters that they set while they were building the report using the ad hoc tools. So you can see the BIRT report is being built right now. And there we go. There's the end result. And with any of the Maximo 7.5 reports, you can export the reports into, and you can pick and choose which data columns you want to export, but you can export them into comma-separated value, which will open very cleanly with Excel, for example. I can do that, or I could export it to a PDF file, a Word document, a PostScript, or an Excel file. Pretty cool. So I can take that and save it off to my desktop or my local drive and make my own reports. If I wanted to make some Excel charts, for example, I could do that. And with all of the canned reports or the reports that are available from the user applications in Maximo, if I back up here a minute, back to the query-based report, the schedule, if you notice that any of the reports that we can run in Maximo can be emailed. So I can email a report to someone as an attachment, and if I do so, I would fill out their email address and then put in the details of my email subject, comments, and then I can email it to them as a PDF or an Excel attachment, which I think is pretty cool stuff. We can also set it up to be a recurring report. So if my boss wants a certain work order report every Monday at 8 a.m., instead of having to remember to run the report and email it to them, I'll just set it up as recurring and identify the date or the day of the week and the time that I want it sent and who I want it sent to. Okay, so that was just a quick and dirty look at the reports in the ad hoc reporting tool as well. We call that query-based reporting in Maximo 7.5. I mentioned key performance indicators, and that the reports can be downloaded. Data can be exported from the list tab in the user application. So if I have a work order query, for example, in Maximo, I can click download from the list tab and bring that data into Excel. Again, ODBC connections for third-party reporting applications such as Excel or Crystal reports or other reporting applications can still be leveraged, and you use that as a method of basically signing into the Maximo database on the back end as opposed to the front-end applications and writing your own reports, and it is a read-only connection. And then the Cognos reports, again, are available as a way to integrate. So I'm being told that we're having some issues with audio. I'm going to go ahead and try to fix that. Are you able to hear me now? Can you hear me? No? Okay. Are you able to hear me? Okay, sorry about that. We were having some audio difficulties here again. Okay, so just to finish up, I don't know how much of that we were able to capture on audio for this slide, but again, the slide will be presented as part of the follow-up if you missed anything. So my apologies for that. Okay, so overall enhancements or user enhancements with 7.5 as opposed to 7.1, when a user saves a record in Maximo, and here's a screen print from work order tracking, when they save an update that they've made to that work order, for example, the focus will remain on the last table row that was edited. So in this case, they edited this row 90, I believe, as a task on their work order. And they went to the Save button. Maximo did not start them back over at the top. They were actually still, the focus was still on their last record or the last row that they were editing. So it sounds like a small enhancement, but if you're a heads-down data entry type person, this was huge when this came out. And the list page, when you save a record and go back to the list page, the results set or your query results on the list page will stay in the state it was left until you hit refresh. So it's not like you have to go back and redo your query if you needed to. The data stays there from your prior query until you refresh it or clear the screen out. Mentioned heads-down data entry. You can enter data at your own pace and then address the errors or any errors that might be in the record you're updating, such as a work order, when you're ready. So what this does is it allows me to either put in a location that doesn't exist in this example and continue filling out the other data fields. And then when I go to hit save, it will tell me that, hey, this field needs to be corrected because the data is not correct. So long descriptions and communication templates, which is a new application for helping you with email communications inside of Maximo, display in a BIRT report. So you can enter text in the format that you want on a Maximo screen. So there's rich text formatting capabilities in reports and long descriptions and communication templates now. So I can bring pictures in if I want. I can make it as pretty as I want. within the long description fields or the communication templates or the reports. Okay, so materials management, I talked about item sets earlier. In 7.5, you can transfer items between an organization that shares the same item set. You can issue items across sites within the same organization. Just trying to cover some of the more popular new features here. Commodity codes are now available with items in Maximo. There's an application for that. Some of the inventory enhancements, condition codes for items. So as an item is brought in and out of service or in and out of a storeroom from operating status, you can check the condition of that item, or if the item is rebuilt, you can identify the condition of the rebuilt item and specify it in terms of a percentage. And you can use that as a method for calculating the value of non-new inventory items. Items can also be put into a kit, so this way I can pick multiple items, compile it into one kit record in Maximo, and I'm able to treat that one kit basically as a separate item or a separate, basically as its own inventory item that can be issued based on a kit. So I think in some of the older versions of Maximo, we might have referred to that as item assembly structures. It's kind of the same concept, but it's actually more ingrained within the inventory applications and the item master application. We can do consignment management with our inventory items now in Maximo 7.5. So those are items owned by an outside vendor. We can keep those in our storeroom and then just pay when used. All those capabilities are now part of core Maximo. There's a shipment receiving application, so you can track your items as they're being shipped from one location to another or transferred from one location or one site to another. Okay, so quickly here, as I try to get through the last minute or so, purchasing enhancements, we can create blanket PO, view blanket PO, and create pricing agreements have all been removed from older versions. Blanket contracts and price agreements are now created in the new purchase contracts application. You can specify ship-to information at the PO line level. You can also view related records on a PO. Related records can be invoices, contracts, or RFQs. We have PO revisioning now, so we're able to revise POs and keep a history of those revisions. And we can also void receipts for transactions that we accidentally received an error that were incorrect. Okay, I think I mentioned several of the work order enhancements. The log tab I did not. So this is one that is, if I quickly jump back to work order tracking, there is a new tab called log. Depending on what version of Maximo you're on, it's new. But here I can create communication or work logs and make entries against a work order. And it's usually, you know, a worker or supervisor or somebody would use this or leverage it as a way to communicate what's been done with the, you know, what kind of progress has been made, or, you know, maybe they're waiting on a part and you can specify what part it is you're waiting on and why, and any of those, you know, it's not really a field or a place to store it in out-of-the-box Maximo, so we're able to use this as a tool for communicating. The communication log itself is where I can actually create an email record or send an email about this work order to my supervisor or whoever needs to know what's going on with the work order, and Maximo will keep a history of those emails and actually what was emailed and what information was sent. I can send attachments and pictures and, you know, other file types along with that email. So Maximo will keep a history there on the log tab. One of the big changes that came out in, I think it was Maximo 5, where work order tasks that you saw in the plans tab actually now create Maximo work orders. We call it reference work orders, task work orders now. And that seemed to freak people out when it first came out, thinking that there would be a lot more records in the database, when actually the what we call work plan operations, which is where those tasks used to be stored, are no longer, that table no longer exists. So what happened is that was phased out and replaced with these work order, reference work orders, these task work orders, if you will. And all of those are stored in the primary work order table. But they do have, quickly here, let me back up. think it's on the next slide. These are some of the benefits. Each one of those task work orders, if you needed to, if it was a really complex work order or project or something like that, you're able to use a task work order and treat it as a standard standalone work order. So you could schedule against that one task work order, for example. You can assign materials, separate GL accounts or equipment for that task work order as well, but yet they all roll up to, the primary work order. There is a database field for that work order table called isTask, and so it's a yes/no field or true/false. So this is what we can leverage when we're working in Maximo to filter out. If I don't want to see task work orders, I can say use that as an option to filter out those task work orders, or whether it's that or a report, I can again leverage that field to filter those work orders out. So there's a whole FAQ available on this concept. So if you're interested in learning more about it, please, as a follow-up, just click on the FAQ link in the presentation file that you'll receive after the webinar today. Just a few asset enhancements I want to call out for the webinar. You can view outstanding work orders and service request tickets on the new Work tab in Assets, which I really thought was a nice new feature that I wanted to mention in today's webinar. And as an example, I'm going to pull up one of my favorite pumps, because it usually has a lot of data associated with it when we're doing a demo, 11430. So if I click on the Work tab, you can see what I'm referring to. So I can see complete work history without having to drill down through the menus for this piece of equipment, this pump. These are all work orders that are not closed or canceled. So these are all what we consider outstanding or open work orders. And I could even drill down into that particular work order if I wanted to see it by clicking on the hyperlink here. And tickets, new concept released in some of the earlier versions of Maximo. These are typically a service request that we then converted or created a work order from. I can see any associated service requests then with this work order from here. So worth mentioning, I thought. I mentioned the asset templates, and we can also have more than 2 meters on assets now. So in closing here, I just have a couple more slides to get through, but I wanted to mention the workflow applications again. Workflow is part of core Maximo now. You had to buy it as a separate app in some of the earlier versions of Maximo. Workflow, if you're not familiar with it, it enables organizations to enforce their business processes within Maximo. So records can follow your business processes if you enable workflow and set them up in Maximo. So the hardest part of enabling workflow and getting it set up really is designing and mapping out your processes. So once you get that done, the easy part is putting it in Maximo. So basically what workflow does is it automates the routing of Maximo records. So if a supervisor needs to review a work order before it gets assigned to somebody, and meaning they need to approve it, for example, we can create a work order workflow that would do so, and Maximo would send the supervisor the work orders as they need to be approved based off of the workflow parameters. It could be PO approvals or work approvals or anything. Really, any record in Maximo can be part of a workflow process if it makes sense. So if you've got purchase order approvals where if it's over a certain amount, it has to go to this group of people for approval, or if it's under a certain amount, it goes to a different group. We can do all of that within one workflow process. Part of workflow is the ability to send email notifications to the people who need to be notified that they need to do some sort of an action on this record in Maximo. We can also use one of the applications available with workflow called Actions to update Maximo records based on certain conditions. So if a work order is created and it's assigned to a certain location with a certain priority, for example, then I can update one of the fields to a certain supervisor or a certain crew member based off of the conditions. So Maximo would do that automatically without a user having to go in and manually make that action update. And then the integration framework I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation is core Maximo. This is what we use to synchronize or integrate data from Maximo with third-party applications. And the data can be synchronized in real time or in batch. And then all data that's entered through the integration framework, that comes in through the integration framework from a third-party application, such as an ERP system, a purchasing system, is fully edited through the Maximo business logic. So the business logic is enforced if you use integration framework. So that's one of the beauties of the tool, is that you don't have to worry about, as much about, rogue data getting into your Maximo applications, because it's enforced through the business logic process using the framework tools. So it's really no different than as if the data had been entered through the front end of Maximo, which is nice. So interfaces can be in real time via the web services like HTTP or EJB, or in batch, which would be flat or XML files or interface tables. Integrations can include on-demand file imports executed from the user's browser. And there are pre-built adapters available from IBM or business partners for some of the enterprise-level ERP systems, such as Oracle or SAP. And then I think this is probably the last slide here before we conclude. So I apologize for going over today. I know we had a little bit of audio technical difficulties, so my apologies. But again, hopefully, if people weren't able to complete the webinar, they'll be able to listen to it on the recording later on. So the automation scripts I mentioned earlier as well, it's a new application with 7.5. I pretty much talked through this. So if you want to extend Maximo customizations or Java class files and not have to go through the hassle of customizing the class file, compiling it, and rebuilding ER files and all of that, you don't have to do that anymore if you use automation scripts. Okay, and here's a sample script that you see here at the bottom. Just so you know, so if the purchase price is greater than or equal to 100, then the vendor field, if the vendor is required, equals true. Otherwise, if it's false, then the replacement cost field equals the purchase price divided by 2. So this is an example of a script that would update a field based off of the conditions outlined in the script. So to conclude today's webinar, obviously there's many new features and applications available with Maximo 7.5, and it's relative to which version you're running now or that you're familiar with, how many changes and new features there are. You can submit any questions or suggestions for future webinars to info@projetech.com, or feel free to email me direct, jrampello@projetech.com. Please check out our resources page for additional information on Maximo 7.5 and new features. We're going to post a link to a very comprehensive PowerPoint that IBM put together on the new features, and there's several screen prints within that as well. So again, another resource that you can take a look at when you have time. And then our next webinar is the topic will be Maximo upgrade considerations in the process and an overview of all of that. It's yet to be scheduled, but we're looking at about probably the first or second week, probably the second week in July, I would say. But just stay tuned. You will see emails going out from Projetech when we do have a confirmed date for that webinar, and hope that you're able to join us. So I want to thank you for your time today. Bye-bye.